Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the 2020 Virtual Missouri Association of Museums and Archives Conference, Navigating Past, Present, and Future. We are excited to have all of you with us. We've had a great turnout for the conference and many great sessions starting Wednesday and then yesterday. And then we are wrapping up today, which is Friday afternoon, with Mark Adams. So I'm very excited to have Mark with us. I'd like to take a minute and thank the Missouri Humanities Council for their support of the conference. And I would also love to thank Linda Endersby and Amanda Langendorfer and our conference committee for their very hard work in setting up the virtual aspect of this. I feel like it's gone pretty well, and it's something that we are experimenting with. Maybe, who knows, in the future, it might be something that we do again. But thank you all for joining us. I'm going to introduce Mark, and I will let him share his presentation. So Mark Adams is the Education Director at the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum. He is also a history educator with more than 25 years of experience at the high school and university level. Prior to joining the Truman Library, Adams was affiliated with the Kansas Museum of History in Topeka. Today, he's going to be presenting An Ordinary Man, An Extraordinary Journey, President Harry Truman. So Mark, I'll let you go ahead and take it away.
And good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I know that usually in a Friday afternoon session, people are all headed out, but you got nowhere to go, so you're stuck with me this afternoon, and I'm really excited to share our museum plans. I know I did a webinar earlier in the year, in the summer, about our plans, and of course we've been really moving on. And I'm going to be showing you today lots of photographs and one short video as well of some of our plans for our new renovated museum. So without any delay, because I want to, we all have things to do at the end of the sessions today, I want to get my screen sharing up here and get the slides up. And I've already messed up, so there we go. Let me get back to the beginning. So that's the title of the session, and it's actually the title of the exhibit that we're going to be reopening the museum in early 2021. And I'll talk more a little about the pandemic and those things, of how that's affected our construction, but we're really doing a great job putting things together. And this main session is going to be talking about the exhibit process and actually showing you some photographs from the last 2 weeks of where we're at. So it's kind of the latest breaking photographs of exhibit installation. So very few design screenshots. I think I've got one of those of what a design area might supposed to look like. Today we're going to be looking really at what the gallery looks like as of in October of this month, where I've been able to visit the library myself and show you the latest images. So just to kind of a quick overview of what the project's all about, you can see the photograph on the left of what our new exhibit, our new museum entrance is going to look like. We're actually moving the entrance from that main entrance that you might be familiar with to the east side for ease of access, and to have one entrance for exhibits, programs, workshops, all coming in the same entrance to cause less confusion. For the first time in the history of the library, and the library opened in 1957, surprising to say, first time all of the Truman story will be told on one level. So on our previous exhibits, we had the life and times of Truman on the lower level, and the presidency of Truman was on the top level. And now it's all going to be on this one level, all in chronological order, and all starting at this main entrance that you will see. Some topics are being highlighted that have not been told before. I'll talk about those as we go on. Of course, we're going to be having more multimedia and interactivity, and certainly showcase more artifacts from our collection, which we did not do really before. We'll actually have 2 rotating galleries downstairs where we used to have one. So we'll have a chance to always have a temporary exhibit on display. Of course, there are favorites on our previous layout and museum exhibits. Some of those things are going to be left alone or maybe added interpretation. One of those, of course, is the Thomas Hart Benton mural, Independence and the Opening of the West, which greeted visitors in our old entrance. That will stay on the wall. It's actually going through some conservation treatment before we reopen. Of course, our grave sites will remain untouched. So President Truman and First Lady Bess Wallace Truman, their graves are there, and they, of course, will not be harmed in any way. And then the Oval Office that we recreated, and is my virtual background photo today, is our Oval Office exhibit. That will remain untouched, although you'll see when I show the photographs in a few minutes, that area is currently empty, but generally everything's going to be put back in place with a few new interpretive panels. And actually you can walk into the office a little bit more than you could before. And then our classroom spaces, museum auditorium, our education area, the White House Decision Center, none of those things are affected. Of course, when you do a big project like this, and it's a $30 million project that we've been working on for almost 5 years, it's a major renovation, and it's probably the largest renovation the library has ever undertaken. We're adding 3,000 square feet to the building, and you can see the list of contractors we've been working with. Exhibit designers are Gallagher and Associates out of Portland, construction by J.E. Dunn, multimedia by Monadnock and Mad Systems, fabrication by 1220 in Nashville, architects Clark Anderson. So if you're interested in those things or have questions about those contractors, I can certainly add those. And I will say from the Truman Library perspective that from the staff, the federal staff that I'm part of has had a real strong voice throughout the whole process. It's not like one of these projects in some museums where the staff is kind of pushed to one side and the contractors do all the work or come up with all the content and concepts. The Truman Library staff has been very heavily involved throughout the entire process, including myself. And that's been really refreshing and a really strong part of the whole project, as you'll see from the exhibit layouts I'm going to show you. So this is kind of inside the building. A lot of these photos were taken in the last 2 weeks, as I mentioned, so they're kind of hot off the press. On that previous slide, you could see the gentleman working on the presidential seal, and you saw the outside entrance. This is the new entrance. This is our old east entrance that some of you might be familiar with, that you came in for special events and workshops and things like that. You can't quite see it from this image, but you will from the next. Let me go back real quick. Just to the right is where the gift shop and ticketing is going to be. So we're going to go into the main exhibit area now. And what we're challenged with when you're telling the story of Harry Truman, you know, do you start in 1884? He was born in Lamar, Missouri. We're going to be doing a chronological story of his life. That seems to be, you know, the way to go. But we decided as a group, with all those contractors that I mentioned, we wanted to start with the highest point of drama for Truman. That could be debated. It could be the decision to drop the atomic bomb. It could be the decision to have troops in Korea. What we decided upon was one of the highest points of drama for Truman was when he actually became president after the death of FDR. So those of you know the Truman story, and most of you I'm sure do, working in the field, is that he was only vice president for 82 days. And then on April 12th, Truman becomes president after FDR dies. So that was our point of drama. So I've embedded the image of the introductory video into this slide. So let's see if this will work for us.
Been my privilege to be a United States Senator for the past 9.5 years, and I expect to continue the effort to help shorten the war and win the peace under the direction of our great leader, Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Returning to Washington with Mr. Roosevelt, Harry Truman was now the Vice President-elect. In his first speech after his inauguration, Vice President Truman said,
"If American democracy is to survive, Germany and Japan must be defeated in battle and thereby taught to respect the rights of other nations."
Surface units of the Pacific Fleet are bombarding Iwo Jima. of the strategic airport, military targets in and around Tokyo.
The operations of the Allies on all fronts have now brought the German war to its final stage. Continue fighting till the final count. We know our enemy well. We must expect him to fight hard to save us.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage. All we know so far is that the president died of...
An era has come to an end. For us, it is more like the death of a father than of an official.
This nation has suffered this day a staggering loss. Vice President Harry Truman, who from here on will be President Truman, went immediately to the White House.
The gravest question mark in every American heart is about Truman. Can he swing the job? Despite his limited capabilities, I think he can.
He comes into office almost unknown to the people at large, and they will await with great anxiety the result of the test that he has to meet.
Roosevelt was a great architect. Perhaps Truman will be a good carpenter.
When people think of President Truman, it is with a mixture of friendliness, loyalty, and gentle skepticism.
No man ever came to the presidency of the United States under more difficult circumstances than does Harry S. Truman.
It would be foolish to pretend that President Truman possesses the qualities of leadership needed by the nation at the moment.
It wanted to start again on me there, but you can see we've got a very dramatic beginning to the beginning of the exhibit. It's actually a walk-in theater, and those screens are about 12 feet high as you walk in. So very dramatic beginning. And then you see the question at the end there, what in his past prepared him for the presidency? And we thought that was a good way to segue into the Truman life story and the beginning. Now, what you see here are some incomplete exhibits, of course, and I'll show you what this is supposed to look like. But on the right side is going to have a family tree, and on the left side, what we're calling a discovery wall, a series of interactives, lasting impressions that Truman had from when he was a child through various interactives that are going to be built in that space. This is what the family tree will look like on that circular surface. So not just Truman's family tree, but also his wife, Bess Wallace. And you'll see a number of exhibits that deal with Bess Wallace Truman as well as Harry Truman. She's far more to the forefront of this exhibit than maybe our exhibits in the past, as their daughter, Margaret Truman, as well. So this is some of the spaces that are being designed and built right now. Not designed, the design is done, of course. Built right now, dealing with the farm years. The Truman spent 11 years on the farm. As you can see, those wall graphics are done, but when we are not yet at the stage of doing artifact installation, although we'll see a few artifacts a little later on. Some of the larger artifacts are in place, but the smaller artifacts are not yet. That's the last phase of the exhibit installation, as you could imagine. And then there you can see kind of an eye chart at the end there as we're getting more towards World War I, where he memorizes the eye chart to get into the National Guard to go over to France in 1917. This is a cutout hole in a wall. How exciting is that? That's what you waited around for on a Friday afternoon, to see a hole in a wall. But this is part of our World War I display and an interactive. And it's actually, the first photo was from 2 weeks ago, and this photo was from this week, where we're installing an interactive. As you can see there, you will turn the wheel and it actually changes the turret on the gun, and you're able to fire the cannons along with Captain Harry Truman. So one of the artifacts there that's kind of a neat interactive, in that it's both mechanical but also computerized. So you actually control a computer screen with the delays, with the design down here at the bottom. There's still some graphic panels and things to go in there, and they're still working on the screen of that, but it's kind of exciting to see that coming into place. And this is all part of our World War I gallery that's being put together. And there's actually a small theater in that area too, which is actually behind these, the caisson on the 75mm gun. This big white wall behind is where the World War I video will be presented, and you can kind of see a screenshot of what the designers expect that to look like. And that's actually up and running. I didn't quite have the video for that for you today, but that's actually up and running. It's a 6 or 7 minute piece. It doesn't really focus entirely on World War I. It focused much more on Harry Truman's experiences as a captain in World War I and his experiences and how that taught him lessons of leadership and so forth as we went forward in his own life. Of course, when he comes home from France, the first thing he does is to get married. So we have a lot of those letters, as you know, from Harry and Bess, and those are featured in this section of the gallery and also in the previous gallery, those letters back and forth. What's exciting for us in this area in the 1920s and the 1930s is we actually have Bess Truman's replies. So prior to World War I, we really don't have any of her letters. And during the time of Truman's presidency, we don't have any of her letters. But in the 20s and 30s, we do have letters back and forth between the two of them. So those are featured heavily in this area, as is the birth of their daughter Margaret in 1924. Of course, this first job that he has, and this is some of the letter information. So we've got books that'll be displayed down here showing the letters, and then of course, quotes from them on the wall. And then the first job that he has really when he comes back from France is to run a clothing store with Eddie Jacobson, the haberdashery. And so these drawers with the handles all pull out and give more information about the haberdashery, and those some artifacts and displays yet to be installed in this part of the gallery. And then if we go forward more into the 20s, that's when the connections to the Pendergast family begin, as he comes out of the haberdashery going bust and into county politics. That's where he comes across Tom Pendergast. He'd actually come across his nephew in World War I. That's how he got known by the Pendergast family at that time. And so as you can see, in 90% of these photographs that you're going to see, it's very much exhibits in progress, but you can get a sense of what these are going to look like. This does in fact include an interactive with these cogs that you can see sitting on a cart in the corner of the room right now, but these are an interactive that you will turn the wheel to see different misgivings Truman has with his relationship to the Pendergast family. We're going to fast forward because some of those other exhibits in between are not really ready for good photographs. This is about, of course, the dropping of the bomb, a photograph of Hiroshima. And in this area, we will be featuring one of our showpiece artifacts, and that is the safety plug, the actual safety plug from the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki that was donated to the library in the 1990s by one of the gunner crew that hand-delivered it to our museum curator, incidentally. And in this area, we will have that safety plug in the middle of the room. And then in the same room, we will have a paper crane folded by the famous Japanese Hiroshima survivor, Sadako. One of her final cranes that she folded for peace was presented to Clifton Truman Daniel, Truman's grandson, by Sadako's brother. And so that was donated to the library. And so both the juxtaposition of the safety plug and the Sadako crane are going to be in that same area, along with voices on an audio track of both Japanese and American viewpoints about the decision to drop the atomic bomb. And then at the end of that, with the Japanese surrender, we have a chart that shows the casualties and deaths in World War II. This is the Soviet Union over on the right, and you can't quite see it here, but the countries are listed on the bottom of that. I've got one that comes out a little bit more, but that font size is pretty small based on the photo. And then as you come out of that area, now that the war is over, what you will see is kind of the showpiece part of the museum. And this is very much an early photo. And then I've got some later ones. This 14-foot high globe that will be illuminated and have video projections on it. And the idea here is to show what the world looks like after the war is over. There's all kinds of crises and problems all around the globe. There'll be silent video projections on 3 different parts of this globe, and it's going to be illuminated through all of these cracks. So the globe itself is showing all of the issues that face the world, all the problems. And on the outside of this room will be exhibits that show where Truman tries to solve some of the problems, what I call the Band-Aids. Some of them work, some of them don't, and he certainly doesn't look at every area in the world, but solutions that he puts the priority on. So I've got a photograph. You can actually walk inside this globe. This is from a few weeks ago, where you can see they're beginning to install touchscreen monitors. And then this is from last week, where you can see the monitors are in place. They still haven't put the inner shell of the globe in there yet, but these touchscreen monitors will have information about families around the world post 1945. So German families, American families, Japanese families, Chinese families. You can explore those in a touchscreen environment to learn more about those families and the problems they face, whether it's starvation, poverty, jobs, whatever the issues are in those particular countries at that particular time. And really very well done. I saw a prototype of that on Monday, actually, very well done, interactive, that they're working on. And then this is what it looks like more now this week. We've got some paper over that there because we're going to have some raised letters added to the globe, kind of a quote from Truman. But you can kind of see the idea where the projections are going to be on the outside, and then these blue LED lights, and they're going to change colors coming through the cracks to really show the issues around the world. Most of the video projection is newsreel from the time, and you can kind of see a better view of that here, where you'll see the newsreel on the globe. And then there's actually 3 of them as you move around the globe, 3 different video projections. So pretty compelling piece and very dramatic, and lit from the bottom and from the inside as well. And here we were playing with the lights. I don't think it's ever actually going to glow red like this, but you know, the photographer in me wanted to take this photo with one of our engineers checking out some of the interactives. And you can see these are all got captions on the bottom of the video projections as well. In that area, there's also what we call our rubble theater. So it's showing you Europe after the war, and it's really the topic of the video is about the Cold War. But what they have are pieces of rubble in the gallery that have been fabricated, and using projection mapping, Monadnock Media have created a documentary about the Cold War where they actually project onto these pieces of rubble. So you can kind of see this window here becomes a projection surface, and this kind of rectangular piece of rubble is a projection surface. And there you can probably make out the map of Europe there in the rubble. So when they project onto it, you can see here just a screenshot of what that projection would look like in that immersive environment. And there you can see where it fills the whole space, where you've got the United States flag. You can see Harry Truman in the window. In this particular section of the video, he's talking about the Truman Doctrine. And it also deals with the Marshall Plan, the Berlin blockade, all of those things that are going to emerge as the Cold War begins. And it really ends with China becoming communist in 1949. So it's that 1945 to 1949 time period that it deals with, but in this really unique way on this rubbled, broken down room representing Europe in ruins at that time. As you come out of there, although Berlin Airlift is featured in that video, there's more extensive exhibits about the Berlin Airlift here, and you can see we've recreated the interior of the fuselage of the plane from this angle. And from this angle, you'll see this is where we'll have a video about the famous candy bomber, Gail Halvorson, who incidentally just a week ago turned 100. He's still alive. A pilot that we interviewed back in 2008 at the library, and we used segments of that video with him and some other footage from the time to talk about his story. And then also in that area, you'll see this rectangular piece of wood over on the right. That is actually, this is some of the statistics that will be on the wall. And then we have a touch screen that will, visitors will be able to use with it. I can only describe as kind of a hockey puck that you would use to move around on the screen and investigate the Berlin blockade and statistics around it and what was done to rescue Berlin during the blockade by Stalin. And then we move on into the 1948 election year. And as you can probably tell by the graphics here, this is to do with the recognition of Israel. And you'll see this is actually a video screen, again, using different segments there. There's actually going to be a seating area here, and then exhibits around the outside with some of the gifts that Truman has received. As some of you obviously probably know, Truman was the first world leader to recognize Israel, and they got the date and time right there, May 14th, 6/11, because on his press release that he signs, he actually puts the time on that release. So the video incorporates the documents and the materials from the library. There's a timeline and exhibits and artifacts related to Israel in that area, along with civil rights. And then we move into the other event of that year, after the Berlin airlift, the recognition of Israel and the integration of the military, which is dealt with that in that previous gallery. We have, of course, the 1948 election. There will be a video screen on the back of the train here. And then, of course, the famous Dewey defeats Truman photograph. And on this white wall that's blank right now, we're going to have an interactive that deals with Electoral College from 1948 up to present day, which visitors can investigate and look and compare the electoral map and different campaign songs and buttons and posters for all of the elections from 1948 through 2020. Let's see. And then as we go into the second term, we look at Truman's domestic legislation through the third deal. These holes in the wall are actually going to be interactive panels. You flip around to see what happened with each piece of legislation. Some of them passed, some of them did not, but they also give you a hint of what happened in the future with some of those. So if they were passed by administrations in the 60s or the 70s, or they were acted upon, you would get information about that too, to talk about the relevance of Truman's decisions as we go forward. And there's just a closer up of that. So you can see they're about civil rights, minimum wage, tax reform, national health insurance. Do any of these issues sound familiar? Yeah, of course. Social Security and so on. Then we go into the Red Scare and China becoming communist and the loyalty oath and HUAC trials before we get to the Korean War. We actually have an interactive game. And I've got actually photographs of some people playing it. We were in on last week testing this out, and you can just about make out the title maybe. Are You a Loyal American is the title of that, and you go through and you end up to see whether you'll pass the loyalty oath board criteria. And I'm here to tell you that I was fired when I went through this game last week. So it's a fun interactive to go through and learn about the loyalty oath program that Truman instituted. And of course, it doesn't shed a very positive light on Truman. And that is the point. We're trying to show Truman warts and all throughout the entire gallery. Then we get closer to the Korean War, and we have a video piece here. I've got a better photograph of this from a distance. So you can see the 6 monitors on the wall, and then these questions are posed. Could the Korean War have been avoided? Did it create a safer world? Did Truman prevent World War III? And then this video plays out. There's a seating area in this space too. Then we get back to the main entrance, or the old main entrance where the Benton mural is, and we had it covered entirely. Just was uncovered in the last month or so. We've got some conservation treatment on it right now, but it looks like it's come through unscathed. We're happy to report. And in this area, really the Truman presidency is over. So this is more of a thematic area, and it looks at the Trumans as a family living in independence. And we don't really have any of those exhibits up yet. You can see where they've cut out the spaces in the walls for some of that information. And there's going to be 2 large projections silent video projections showing photographs of the Trumans in independence, growing up, and then later on post-presidency. And then the other thematic area, which is really where our old gift shop used to be, is the Trumans in Washington. Of course, Truman was not only president for 7.5 years, but he was also senator for 10 years. So those almost 18 years in Washington, we have displayed in this area. And you can see the presidential seal and the columns there. And then the exhibits are kind of in the White House. Architecture is used to show the family life and different themes that we developed for looking at the Trumans in Washington over those 18 years. And even some color photographs that we're excited to show too. This is a fireplace that was taken out of the White House in 1950 when the White House was renovated. And we've got a whole section in this area about the White House renovation. And you can see the beams. You see the fireplace on the right. These beams were taken out of the White House during that same renovation. You've probably seen those on display before. They're now hanging from the ceiling, and they are incorporated, and you can see the close-up there, and we're showing what the studs and the walls would have looked like during the renovation. We have a touch screen that's going in, which looks like this, where you can investigate all of the different renovation of the White House, choosing each of these floors, and you can investigate photographs prior to the renovation, during the renovation, and after the renovation. And you can kind of see a close-up of that. I've got a better one where we have one of our engineers touching the screen here and operating it, but then a larger screen right under the beams where other visitors can see the photographs that he's looking at, because you can actually cast them onto the large screen above you if you wish, or you can just look at them yourself. So that's a really cool interactive. And our senior curator, Klebowski, some of you may know, he's worked there more than 30 years, even close to retirement. He's a good friend of mine. I can joke around a little. He was really gushing about this interactive. He thought this was so well done. He was really thrilled. And all of those photographs are from our collection, every one of them. Mainly 95% of them taken by Abby Rowe, a photographer for the National Park Service, who documented the entire renovation. And his photographs are the ones we actually use for our replica Oval Office that he took in 1950 as well. And we have all of those photos in our collection at the library. So we're very lucky to use an interactive that really enhances our audiovisual holdings. I promised you photographs of an empty Oval Office. So unlike my virtual background, which is what it looked like before the renovation took place, they're really not changing the design of this, but they needed to take it out to do some lighting and temperature control changes. And they've actually going to bump in the rail that was in this room a little further in, so you can step a little further into the gallery and make a larger space for tours. So you get to see it empty, which is, I've worked at the library 23 years, and it was the first time I'd seen the Oval Office empty. So that was kind of a thrill for some reason. So that area though, right outside of the Oval Office, we will have the Book Stops Here sign still on display in that area. But the rest of the interpretation outside of there is about the three branches of government. So we deal with the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branch. And we have an interactive, it's not been finished yet, but it's going to go right here with cubes that show you what happens for a bill to become a law. In this case, we chose one that Truman vetoed and Congress overturned his veto. So we show the limits of presidential power through the Taft-Hartley bill. We show the Supreme Court, and using the case study there, where the Supreme Court ruled against Truman in the steel crisis case. So again, we're showing the limits of presidential power. And then you can see a little closer up there with the political cartoon dealing with the steel crisis and the Constitution itself. And then what Truman classed in the lighting is terrible on this. They're still working, of course, on the lighting. What Truman called the 6 jobs of the president, as we examine the executive branch. And in one day, in one diary entry, he represents all 6 jobs of the president in one day. And then we have all of his cabinet members listed throughout his entire 7.5 years as president as well. And then as we leave that, we go more into the legacy area and we look at some of these key decisions that Truman made. This graphic is not finished yet, but it'll show in this first one, desegregation of the military, my second photo, the text is a little easier to see, and what those issues were like before and what those issues were like afterwards, to show the connections of the Truman legacy as we go forward. And then this is where you would be able to see out into the courtyard, similar to before, but they've redone this whole window. So it's a much clearer view out there as you go forward. And then there's a video on the left that shows Truman's funeral, narrated by Walter Cronkite, the original footage from television. And then you see a series of political cartoons that show the legacy of Truman after he passes in 1972. And then you can kind of see this photograph of these different jobs that he had: a farmer, a soldier, a businessman, politician, president, and at the end, a grandfather. So we got the family in there too. And then as you come back out into the main lobby, the new main lobby, we have a quote on the wall, which I'll finish with, which I think is really appropriate because we include Mrs. Truman in there as well. Hope and believe we've contributed to the welfare of the nation and to the peace of the world. And there's my email address and website address, and a very excited third grader from Independence in our Oval Office exhibit before we close down. So with that, I'm going to stop, and then I will take a look at the Q&A first of all. Maggie, my friend Maggie asks, how has the pandemic impacted your plans for interactive opportunities? Maggie, you'll be so pleased to know, Maggie's a good friend of mine, so I can tease her a little bit. We formed a committee. That doesn't sound surprising, right? So we formed a committee for staff and public safety, and we are working on recommendations provided by the American Alliance of Museums, as you can imagine, from ASLH, and from international museums too that have already started to open in Europe, looking at all of those guidelines. We're looking at hand sanitation stations and all kinds of things about cleaning products for the monitors, for touchscreen, so you don't damage the monitor in the future. And I'm sure many of you are going through many of these same issues. But yeah, we're looking at all of those things. Honestly, the longer we delay, the better it is, I think, in some ways, because we're hoping, of course, like everybody, there's a vaccine or the cases can go down. But we're certainly very well aware of the interactive nature of many of our exhibits, and it's a challenge of how we're addressing that. And you'd be very pleased to know, Maggie, that I'm on that committee. So more work for me, which is fun. Catherine asks, what is the projected reopening date again? We say I never actually told you. So, oh, you want me to tell you? Okay, well, we really don't have a date, honestly. We're still working on the installation, as you can see. I think originally we had said fall of 2020. I'm here to tell you that's not going to happen. And that's a lot to do with the pandemic in a way, because although it's not really delaying the construction crews and the exhibit crews being on site, it is causing some supply delays. So if you're hoping to get some supplies from California or New York or somewhere else for a particular part of the exhibit, it is causing some supply delays there. So what we're hearing right now is that artifact installation should start taking place in January. And that's the last phase. A lot of the multimedia has gone in the last 2 weeks, and there's a final step of that probably in January as well. So without the pandemic, I would say February, but with the pandemic, we're part of the National Archives. They currently don't have any presidential libraries that are operated by the National Archives open at this point. So we do have to listen to the National Archives and literally give permission to open. And those of you who live in the Kansas City metro area know that Jackson County numbers are not great right now. So the local conditions is what National Archives is looking at. And as long as those Jackson County numbers stay in the red, it's unlikely we'll be opening anytime soon. We're kind of fortunate in that we can continue to work on the exhibits. So my fudged answer is early 21, but don't quote me on that. That we can't do any promises. So we have about 5 minutes of our time, but of course I can stay on too if people have other questions or comments.
Mark, I have a question. It sounds like you're tackling a lot of very complicated topics in the exhibit, and I really like the way you're doing it. It looks like you're coming to some good conclusions. You're doing it well. But what do these conversations look like in the content development process?
Yeah.
How's that go?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you think about it, just to make a bigger picture about this, is that, you know, the funding for this is coming from our private foundation. They've raised all of the money. There's no federal dollars being spent on the project. I mean, there is in terms of like a new air conditioning unit, you know, and that's not cheap. It's like $1 million air handling unit, but primarily the $30 million is raised by our Truman Library Institute. And they're not going to go out and say, hey, let's tell a story of how terrible Harry Truman is, right, to raise the money. I mean, they're going to want us to shed a very positive light on him. But when it comes to the actual content, there's been no pressure. There's no pressure from Truman's grandson, who's the oldest living relative, and really no pressure from our foundation. They've left it in the hands, what I would say, of the content experts. And I'm one of those little bit of a naysayer and say, we need to do this warts and all. We need to look at things that didn't work. Nobody's perfect. And I will say that our supervisory archivist, Sam Rouchet, is kind of very similar mindset. And we're kind of the two people that really remind everybody, hey, you're making them look too good, which seems like an unusual thing to do. But it really, we learned from our renovation we did in 2001, in that the visitors really appreciated kind of the more thoughtful, more balanced approach. And we give opportunities for feedback through electronic feedback stations and comment books. I really didn't get into all of that. But we really wanted not to, of course, show Truman badly for no reason. We really wanted it to be very thoughtful. Ultimately, as an educator, because that's my background as education director, I want the visitor to make up their own mind. I don't want us to prescribe any thought or opinion on people. So we really try to reflect as many different opinions as possible. So we have a series of laminated, they're not laminated, I can't think of the correct word, but they're flip books. They're very durable material where we have letters on different issues, whether it's Israel, civil rights, steel strike, where you can see different opinions as you flip through. And they're very beautifully designed by the graphic design team from Gallagher and Associates. They're just really well done. And they're the ones that tell us, you know, you only need 6 letters, you don't need 60, right? To show the different opinions. So we really, in terms of the content discussions, we really wrestled with that and really wanted to show all forms of opinion and let the visitor decide. Of course, the positive things of Truman are showcased, and we really try to focus on the legacy, even if things didn't work, like in the Fair Deal. How did LBJ pick them up in the 60s and things like that? So a very thoughtful approach from that perspective. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it sure did. Looks like you guys are doing a lot of really innovative, well, the graphics design is fantastic, but also the videography, you know, the way you're piecing those videos together. What company is doing that for you?
So Monadnock Media is doing the bulk of the video. We're very fortunate. We've worked with them before. We did a touchscreen experience of the Truman's working office about 7 years ago now. And we worked with them then on our curated, and they actually worked on our renovation in 2001, but they've come a long way in terms of the technology. They actually designed the Loyalty Oath interactive game that we field tested with 7th graders back in 2019 or something. But they're very, very creative. The touch screen for the Berlin Airlift is completely animated. So that's a real fun one, where you can kind of turn these, like what they call them hockey pucks, but it's basically a 3-dimensional plane that you turn on the screen to reveal more information, completely animated. But yeah, the projection mapping in the Cold War area is really spectacular. And then the opening video that I shared with you, hard to tell on a computer monitor, of course, but that's a 12-foot screen that really surrounds you. It's a 180-degree screen. So you really get, and it's a walkthrough experience. So you really get a sense of being immersed straight into the drama of the story. So they've done a phenomenal job with that. And they're still working on a couple. They're also doing the World War I gun with the animation on the screen and also the mechanical wheel on for the controls. So they've been really creative for us. We have a question. What do you feel is the most important piece in this newer permanent exhibit that you feel guests should totally absorb? Wow, that's an amazing question. I think what's going to get a lot of publicity, you know how that is with, we're all about marketing, right? We think we're educators or curators or archivists, but we're all marketers really, because we want people to come in our building. I think that's going to get a lot of media attention is going to be this 14-foot high globe, because it really is remarkable. And those of you watch my webinar in the summer, you got to see it in pieces in Nashville, and those little segments like orange slices. So that was really cool to see that come together. I just thought of that analogy on the fly. That's pretty good. And so I think in terms of attraction and people seeing in the media and on the news, they're going to see that globe. But in terms of guests should totally absorb, I'm really struck by the last two words of that question, absorbing the content. Probably the way we treat the atomic bomb decision with having the safety plug and the Sadako crane. As a museum person, I will say using artifacts to tell the story is the most important thing we do. And we've got two artifacts from very, very, very different perspectives that help tell that story from all perspectives, just through two artifacts. It's kind of amazing. And they're both really, really small. The paper crane is tiny. I should have said, as educator, we have 600 paper cranes created by students in the metro area on acid-free paper. I would add origami paper cranes that they've all folded in the spring that are going to be displayed right next to the original, separated, of course, because that's an original artifact, but they're going to be the backdrop for that. So I think that's going to be a really stunning piece. And I think the way we deal with Truman's decision to make that fateful decision through those two artifacts is going to be very compelling. So I think that's probably the best answer I can give there.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mark. I'm very excited to see it. It's really been breathtaking to see the process. I'm sure that you guys are looking forward to welcoming visitors and especially the kids back to the space.
We're ready to have a party. We're ready to open the champagne. We really are. But I will say that for a little bit of marketing, but follow our social media channels. That's where the latest information is put out. There's some cool videos there put on by our archivist, Tammy Williams, who's our social media person. So our Facebook page particularly is really good to see the latest information as we get each piece added. And that will be where we announce, exact dates and things like that as well. So keep an eye on that for, future news, breaking news, as they say. So that's a good place to go to get that.
So we're really seeing through this conference the state-of-the-art museum practice and archival practice that Missouri is offering up. And, this project is amazing. We've seen several other virtual tours and presentations this week. And I'm really proud of our state and the work that we're doing. And this is just highlights one more amazing project here in Missouri. So kudos to all of you. Mark, thank you so much at the Truman Library and all of our attendees. I know you guys are also doing great things in the museum field. So thank you for the wonderful work that you do, and hopefully we'll navigate this pandemic and be able to get more fully operational like we like to be and doing our work. A couple of housekeeping things. We have sessions tomorrow starting at 9 a.m. And the session at 10 a.m. tomorrow has been canceled. Unfortunately, Dr. Laura Burnham is having a family emergency. So we'll try to reschedule that for a MAMA webinar later on after the conference is over. So we'll definitely try to get that presentation out to you at some point. And then at 10:45, we will close the conference with the Missouri Heart of the Nation Art Collection as Artifact, Archive, and Living Laboratory. But thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Mark. Any last words, Mark, before we sign off?
Hey, I just want to thank the Missouri Association for putting all of this together. I know logistically virtual is really difficult, and really appreciate the organization and all the support from the Humanities Council and everybody else for deciding to tune in on a Friday afternoon. So I think think it's happy hour. Go enjoy it.
Yes, have a great evening. And we'll see a lot of you back here tomorrow morning.